Hello, viewers of Spell. This is the video I've been talking about for a little bit. The all-in-one first 4 parts of What If Asta was in Fairy Tail. This is kind of what I'm going to be doing for a lot of my what ifs, to where I put them together once I get so many episodes out. Now, I do have to apologize for this video from the standpoint of I'm using multiple different microphones. I have the one I'm using to record this, which is different from the one I used to record the what ifs. The first part 0 sounds very different from the rest, and just it sounds a little bit like a mess due to slight differences in the recording, which I'm not fully sure on. I've tried to match them out, but there are quite a few differences, so just bear with me. Other than that, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Commenting really does help the video, and I hope you enjoy. Now on to the what if. Our story starts off with Asta being dropped off at the Fairytail Guild Hall. Makarov would find him in the morning and take him in. He would raise him like an adoptive son. Asta would grow up and form a brotherly bond with Loxus. But the two would grow distant with time, especially when Loxus's father got kicked out of the guild. He would have a friendship/rivalry with Natsu and Gray, and if Erza wasn't around, he was oftentimes the one to try to get him to stop fighting, oftentimes with threatening that he was going to tell Erza they were fighting. That always seemed to get him to stop. But he would not gain magic powers like many of the other members of the Fairytail Guild. He would try his hand at many other types of magic. Solid script, which he would learn, but not fully embrace. He even tried the magic Mystican frequently used, but he never quite got the hang of it, and he found it not to be his liking. But either way, he would continue to absorb magical knowledge, learning how to read different forms of languages, in hopes that he would eventually find either a reason why he couldn't, or magic he could use. And until that day came when he found magic he could use, he trained his body. In fact, he got Elfman into the practice to try to help control his magic. So, Asta would work out like he would in the normal series. When he turned 15, Makarov gave him the map. The location on the map was not that far away. A week's journey there and a week's journey back. Makarov would send him off with encouraging words, and said that he hoped Asta would find answers, or at least closure, even though he didn't say it out loud, instead sending Asta off with a smile on his face. When he arrived at the location on the map, he found a cottage far out from any village. When he walked in, there was a layer of dust. No one had lived there in a long time. Years, at least. The cottage looked fairly plain, despite the dust. He could tell things were well worn, but well made. In the corner of the cottage, he would discover a trap door. Going down there, he found a cellar, though it didn't hold food, for it had a shelf of books, and everything in there either looked inedible or maybe it was food. It was hard to tell with its dark color. Asta, holding his nose, would walk through the dark room, wishing he had brought a light. Once he struck a match, he would wind up tripping over a random rock, shaking the table that he had uncovered. A book would fall off and begin to float, and it started flying at him at great speed. He quickly jumped back, thinking it was trying to attack him, but it followed him, hitting him straight on and colliding with him, throwing him into the bookshelves. Books would fall on him and he would black out. You'd wind up waking up with a 5-leaf clover mark on the back of his hand. Perplexed, he looked for the book, unable to find it. He would read through the books, but not be able to figure much out. Most of the tomes were about normal magic, some about magical ailments, seraph. None were forbidden texts, but the ones about Zareth were teetering towards it. Knowledge about the Dark Wizard was usually done by mouth. Most people thought he was a mighty powerful wizard. Some believed he was immortal, and some believed he didn't even exist, and that his legendary demons were not the work of one man. Perhaps abominations created over centuries, or perhaps created for some war that has been lost to time immemorial. But either way, the most important thing he found, in the long term at least, was a book. A simple leather-bound book that was a diary. Unfortunately, he couldn't read it. Neither could Levy when he eventually asked her. It was apparently because it was written in a code of sorts. That, and the handwriting was not very good, making the code possibly untranslatable by some spelling error, even if he did discover it. He would put the book on the shelf of his room in his rented apartment. And he would also discover he had the ability to summon a large black sword. Once he found that out, he went and told Makarov he had discovered what kind of magic he could use. He could summon a sword that could cut magic. Makarov would give him a bit of an inquisitive eye, and also would just say that he was able to put things together after going to the house. He would leave out the clover mark or the book hitting him. After all, he wasn't even sure if he had seen that right. Later that year, though, Lizana would die. Asta would take it hard, having a minor crush on her. And after that, he would go on a handful of adventures. Perhaps I'll elaborate on those more in the future. But for right now, the most important thing is he discovered the Demon Dweller Sword and learned of its special abilities. So we flash forward to the events of the second episode of the anime. Episode 1 would go about the same. It starts off with Lucy and Natsu entering the Fairytail Guild Hall. Things start off the same here, with Natsu starting a massive brawl. The main difference is Asta's involved in the brawl this time, and physically picks up Natsu and throws him. Hey, let's talk about this! How many times do I have to tell you, no fighting in the guild hall? With Natsu promptly getting thrown into the bar. Lucy would also recognize Asta, since he's somewhat famous for his ability to negate magic, similar to Natsu having an epithet already. Everything else goes about the same. Lucy joins the guild. The big difference here would be the mission to save Makao. Asta joins, and they promptly stomped the monster that was possessing him. And going on to the next arc. Natsu would look at the job, think it was great for Lucy, and would also see if Asta wanted to come along, just in case this book was enchanted, because this was a lot of money. And Natsu might not seem like it at times, but he's smart enough to realize, at least in this what if, something might be up. So he brings Asta along just in case, like, the book was cursed, then it released some eldritch abomination. Don't want one of those things happening again. So things would go the same here, where they're told that the book has brought misfortune to this family, and they would wish them to destroy it. Asta would find this curious, but would go along with it. Maybe they'll get more information as they go. When they reached the building, Lucy got rejected for the maid position because of the owner's odd taste. They'd break in, and after Natsu tries acting like a ninja, and Asta more or less just letting him go with it, and with Lucy asking him if this was a normal occurrence, which Asta just asked, anytime you need to be sneaking, Natsu just, acts like a ninja. When they were attacked by the maids, Asta would quickly summon his sword and bash them away, and Natsu would just light Virgo on fire, and they would quickly presume to find the book, with Lucy recognizing that it was written by a famous author. Natsu wanting to try to light it on fire, and Lucy just saying that she's going to read it. Asta then chiming in that they have company, and in the doorway would appear the Vanish brothers, along with the owner of the mansion, who was short and had a mustache. Yes, I forgot his name. Lucy would tell them to buy her a few minutes as her and Happy ran off with the book. She thinks there's something up with it. The owner of the mansion would pursue her, and Natsu and Asta would confront the Vanish brothers. The battle would be fierce. Unlike in canon, it was a 2-on-2 battle. The Vanish brothers would be shocked at both of them having near inhuman strength, with them even trying their heaven and earth technique, slamming both Natsu and Asta into the ground, which they proceed to just get up from. Natsu, being tired of this, would launch a fire dragon's roar at them. The attack would get absorbed. Being surprised, thinking that was something Asta would do, and realizing they were probably going to try to launch it back at him, Asta would remind Natsu that if it's his own fire, he can't eat it, and just told him that he would handle it. He would bring the Demon Dweller sword out, holding it like a bat. The Vanish brothers would scoff on what he's planning on doing, and they launched the fireball at him. Asta, just smirking, says, "Batters up," as he hit the attack back at them. Them being surprised would be caught completely off guard, and the Vanish brothers would be defeated. As they're patting themselves on the back for their victory, Virgo would emerge again, catching both Asta and Natsu off guard, thinking they had already defeated her, and that she seemed insanely strong. Asta would just tell Natsu to handle it. He has a bad feeling that Lucy might be getting caught off guard by this guy's weird magic, and would run after her, while Natsu would handle Virgo. Their battle would continue off camera, both in canon and in the story. Meanwhile, down in the sewer, I'm guessing, Lucy is deciphering the book when the owner of the mansion grabs her. She would get free and reveal that the book contained incriminating evidence, what the owner of the mansion had done, and the levels of corruption he was involved with. He would sneer and pull a dagger, as Asta would come in and block it. The owner of the mansion would be shocked that they survived the Vanish brothers, and quickly pulled out a key. Lucy recognizing it as a celestial spirit key, one of the gold ones too, as he summoned Virgo. And Natsu, weirdly enough. Both Asta and Lucy would be shocked by this, since Asta knows about a bunch of different magics. He would know how pretty much this was unheard of. And things would go as canon, since now things would go pretty easy, since Asta and Natsu would just team up and pummel Virgo, and Lucy would summon Cancer and give the owner of the mansion a really bad haircut. The mansion would also collapse. When they went back to the man who hired them, it was revealed that he's the son of the man who wrote the book, and things would play out as normal, with Lucy revealing that the book was under a spell and that the book actually was meant to be given to his son. And they would also hand the information over to the authorities, so that the scumbag wound up getting arrested. On the way back, they would run into Gray. After Natsu and Gray would stop bickering, Asta would ask Gray if he wanted to travel with them, since it seems that he's heading back to the Guildhall too. Gray would accept. So now, the people in the group are Natsu, Lucy, Happy, and Asta traveling back to the Guildhall, with Lucy saying how they didn't get paid, with Asta just interjecting that technically they didn't destroy the book. The couple weren't that wealthy, so that much money probably would have bankrupted them. And then Lucy just interjecting, saying that's not the issue. She has rent coming up in a week and a half. Asta just nodding and saying he'll keep an eye out for any quick jobs that look like they'll be a fit for her. Lucy would just smile and say thank you. And then while they're walking, both Asta and Natsu stop, with Natsu jumping into the bush. Asta just saying, "Hi, Gray." 2 seconds later, both Natsu and Gray jump out of the bush, yelling at each other. Lucy would just ask Asta how he knew that, and Asta would just say, "Key." Lucy looking confused, Asta would just say, "I'll explain it later." And they would sit down and talk like normal. Gray would mention how Erza is going to be back soon, with Natsu looking concerned, and Lucy just exhibiting excitement about seeing her, since she is one of the most famous Fairytail guild wizards currently living. With Natsu and Gray going over their normal spiel about how scary she is, and Asta just mentioning she can destroy a small town, and that she's not that bad. With Gray and Natsu saying, "Easy for you to say. She doesn't regularly knock you around." With Asta just saying, "It's not that hard. I don't break the guild hall and walk around half naked. It's not that hard, guys." With Natsu and Gray just looking at him, debating whether or not they should just, team up against him. As the cliff they're on explodes, they realize Happy's been grabbed and proceed to track down his kidnappers. A group of mages from the Eisenwald guild had kidnapped Happy for food. They quickly jump in, with Natsu quickly being caught up in a ball of sand. Asta and Gray would proceed to just punch and kick the Eisenwald guild members into submission, saving Happy. With Happy just saying, "Took you long enough! Help!" With Lucy untying Happy. They would tie up the Eisenwald guild members, and they asked them why did they kidnap Happy, and why on earth would they consider eating a sentient creature? Half delirious from the concussions they have, one of them would mutter "Lullaby" before Happy and Asta pushed everyone out of the way of a shadow that pulled down the tree that they had the Eisenwald guild members tied to. Natsu would just ask, "What was that?" With Asta responding, "Not sure. Whoever it is already about out of my sensory range. They're fast. Doubt I could catch up." And with that, they would just leave, like in canon. but Asta would be questioning why he said lullaby. After all, a lullaby is to help someone sleep. Maybe he was just delirious? After all, he did seem pretty hungry, and they got hit hard enough to knock out normal people, so maybe he didn't? Maybe he simply didn't hear them right. And they would go back to Guildhall. After that, they would be looking for a job with the normal ruckus happening in the Guildhall, with Loki having the same reaction as in canon to the fact that Lucy was a celestial spirit mage, with Lucy asking, "What was that about?" With Asta saying, "Not sure. Loki, he's always seemed weird, and I heard he had a bad interaction with a celestial spirit mage in the past." Lucy just nodding, thinking, yeah, just something personal with him. And she would ask them what the whole thing he was saying with Ki was. Asta would just explain that Ki is basically the name for being able to sense life energy around him, and some other little things like that by using all of his senses. With Lucy responding that she had never heard of anything like that before. He just said Yami taught him. And Lucy would just ask who this person Yami was. Asta would explain that he's one of the S-class wizards, and that as far as he's aware, all of them are out. Erza is actually going to be the first one back in a while. S-class wizards can take jobs that could last for a couple months. And at that moment, Loki would come running back in and yelling, "Erza's back!" And everyone would immediately quiet down and make sure no tables and chairs were knocked over, and everyone just taking a quiet seat. Erza would come in with her giant horn, covered in jewels, and just mention her disappointment with several people, except Asta. She just said hi. Asta waving back, Lucy would turn around to see Gray and Natsu acting like they're best friends. Not that, they're trying to beat each other up 5 minutes ago. With Mira Jane just explaining that it wasn't that long ago when Erza wound up beating both of them up pretty good. Erza would ask where the guildmaster was, and Mira would just explain he was at the meeting. Erza would seem disappointed and then just told Asta, Gray, and Natsu that they were all gonna be on a little trip. She had heard some Dark Guild members talking about something called Lullaby, and that must have been no good. Asta remembering back to some other guys who mentioned that, and they go along. And pretty much this part's the same as canon. When they get to the train station, Natsu and Gray are just staring daggers at each other, with Asta just kind of reminding them, Erza's right there, and I'm pretty sure she can use Ki and can sense your aggression. And at that moment, they both just stared at him and just, started acting like best friends again. Again, just in case you could literally see them, or sense they're staring daggers at each other. Asta would just internally chuckle at the fact that he's pretty sure Erza never learned it, but being able to make Natsu and Gray sweat is just funny to him. Erza would also mention that apparently Lucy's been getting a bit of an exaggerated reputation, and Lucy is now horrified that Erza thinks she's, really strong. Erza would then mention some of the stuff they kept saying she did around the Guildhall, with Lucy just, being a little traumatic that they've been spreading rumors about her doing stuff and being like, yeah, she beat this guy using a pinky. And, the fact that Erza thought she could do that. Also would just internally chuckle at the fact that since he knew Lucy decent at this point and knew that, yeah, someone started those, and it wasn't her. Which did make him think, who did? Natsu? No. Happy? Definitely not. He's too snarky. He'd just make rumors that she was using magic to hide her weight or something. But just assumed it was gossip. And then Natsu would put out his condition that if he goes on this job with her, she would fight him. Gray thinking that was a horrible idea. Asta being surprised that he challenged her so soon after getting the crap kicked out of him. And they would go on the train, where Natsu would proceed to get horribly sick. Erza would just knock him out, with Lucy remarking that, "I see all the fairy tale wizards are a little insane," with Asta being able to hear her, just nodding. When they got off the train, like normal, they forgot Natsu. Erza would have her moment of being somewhat livid at the fact she forgot Natsu on a vehicle, no less. Seeing his head out the window, just yelling, "Wait, you forgot me!" Erza, after realizing this, would run to the control room to shut down the train. When she eventually managed to find the control room, the train had gotten pretty far down the tracks. When she managed to shut down the train, one of the conductors told her that she couldn't do that, and she would just respond that it was an emergency. And they would quickly rent a magic mobile and go after him. Like canon, he would have his interaction with Kage, and Natsu would fall out of the train car. They would catch him, and he would mention what he saw, with Asta being the one that went pale first. Asta would ask Natsu if he was sure on what he saw. Natsu would respond with, "Yeah, why?" With Asta just saying what it was, a dark magic tool made by Zareth. Those who heard its song would sleep for an eternity. If it's just half as dangerous as the stories, it could wipe out a whole town. At that point, they would get in the magic mobile and drive fast. The next city on the train tracks could be their target, and thousands of lives could hang in the balance. When they got into town and went to the train station, they found the workers outside trying to calm a crowd. The workers seemed happy to see a guild wizards, and Erza asked them what happened. They said the dark wizards took over the train station, and that soldiers had entered a little bit ago to try to arrest them. They had heard fighting, but then nothing. After the soldier told Erza this information, she grabbed his microphone and told everyone that they had a powerful magic item and that they should all run for their lives. This started a small panic, and the train worker asked what she was doing. She would just respond that it's better to cause a small panic than have everyone here die. When the gang of Erza, Lucy, Happy, Natsu, Gray, Asta entered the building, they would discover that the soldiers had been defeated. Asta could tell a few of them were alive, but the only reason why they were is they were thought to be dead. When the main group got to the main room of the train station, they discovered over 24 dark wizards, including several that looked to be strong. One man seemed to be half out of the dirt, using some sort of phase magic or something similar. Kage, the shadow user Natsu encountered on the train, a man with a weird head outfit that Natsu then proceeded to poke fun at, earning a chuckle from Ray while Asta still looked serious. A man with a clock in hand and white hair, and Aragorn, the group's leader, a white-haired man with a scythe and tattoos. The man holding the watch just said that they were 5 minutes late, and nodded to Aragorn. Erza would yell at them, saying they won't let him use the train station's sound system to play the lullaby. The Dark Wizards would just sneer and say, "What's she got to do about it?" as several of the strongest members just ran off. This earned a grimace from every one of our heroes. They didn't know which one had the lullaby. Erza would tell Natsu, Gray, and Asta all to pursue them. Her and Lucy would handle the main body, and she would pull out a sword. Asta, Gray, and Natsu would go in pursuit of the group that ran off. After it pretty much happening like a cannon, to where Erza showed off her re-equipping skills and taking out almost 30 Dark Guild members, Natsu and Asta running up the stairs, since that seemed to be where the whole group went. Asta would say they should split up, the other two agreeing, silently wishing each other luck, and they would break off in their own fights. The man with the weird headdress would attack Gray. showing off he had the ability to manipulate some sort of long, fabric-like strands from his fingers. This would surprise Gray as he jumped back, but he would quickly freeze them, and the person they were connected to, and ask what their plan was, or just leave him encased in ice, which would probably kill him before help arrived. Natsu would be chasing down Kage for the rematch, with a similar result as in canon. Fire met shadow. Shadow fists shot out of the ground. Natsu dodged, launching a fire dragon iron fist in response. Kage would begin to laugh, saying that, "I see you were stronger than on the train. What, you got some motion sickness?" Natsu would just grimace and tell him what's it to him, as he let out a fire dragon's roar, with Kage just going into a shadow. Natsu grimacing, saying, "I really hate fighting this guy. He's so annoying," as Shadow Fist hit him in the back. Meanwhile, Asta had met his opponent. The man seemed to be the tactician of the group. He was holding their pocket watch and saying that the wizards of Eisenwald should be able to beat up some puny guild wizards in about 10 minutes. Asta, when he heard this, would just tell him two things. One, I think you're underestimating us puny guild wizards. Two, we're gonna beat your guys up in 5, before smiling. The man would just look over and say that if he made a guess they're from Fairytail, Asta would just say, "Yeah, we're gonna defeat you." The man responding would just say that they're gonna make a better world. One without the riffraff. Before launching ice shards at Asta. Asta jumping up and slicing through them with his sword. Would be shocked. A sword that destroys magic. As his eyes go wide. The man would look up in shock and say, "Wait, you're Fairytail's demon swordsman. The one who can destroy magic." "Yeah, my companions are the S-class wizard, Erza Scarlet, and Salamander. I doubt your guys are going to be much of an issue." The man would just grimace. He didn't think Fairytail would just have these wizards lying around to get sent after him. As he grimaced at him, launching ice. Natsu, dodging fairly easily, would just ask if this was all he could do, as a quick burst of speed launched him forward, as he hit him with the back of his blade, launching him into the wall. He would quickly start to form another ice shard to launch at him before Asta destroyed it in his hand and held his blade up to his throat. He would then ask him, "What's your plan?" And I can be very persuasive. Giving off such killing intent, it made the previously stoic man have a bead of sweat drop down his face. Now, moving over to Natsu's fight. He had had trouble fighting Kage. Shadows going up and attacking him, but he had realized Kage wasn't able to see through a shadow. This allowed him to grab his head and punch him in the face, which sent him flying into the wall. Natsu, looking like an angry flame demon, would say he was going to get back at him for insulting his guild and his friends. But before he could do that, Erza ran up and asked where Asta was. Natsu, being a little surprised, would take his eye off of Kage, tell Erza they split up. Her, out of breath, would say that Aragorn had put up a wind barrier. No one in here had the lullaby. Scowling at this news, Natsu turned around, saying, "Alright, time to explain where you're..." But stopped short as he noticed that Kage was gone. He'd taken his eye off of him, and Kage was still conscious. Natsu would yell in frustration at the fact that his enemy he had beaten down had managed to escape. They also realized that Asta was in danger if they figured out who he was, since his anti-magic could destroy the barrier. But they don't think anyone saw who he was, otherwise they probably wouldn't have even attempted something like this. Gray would run up and tell them that he knows where their real target is. It's in Clovis. Gray, not knowing what was in Clovis, Erza would just go pale, as she quickly said that they're going to attack the Guild Masters Summit, and Makarov was there. Gray and Natsu figuring out the severity of the situation, would quickly start running off in multiple directions to find Asta. They had to get out of this quickly. It didn't even matter if they caught every member, if they were stuck inside. Natsu would also ask where Lucy and Happy were. Erza would just say that she had sent them the other way. Hopefully they had already conveyed the information to Asta, to Lucy and Happy at this time. Hallway looking for Asta. They heard the sounds of battle and rushed there. But by the time they had gotten there, they saw him pinning the white-haired man to a wall. Ice spikes were in the walls, which made her assume that he must have been an ice mage. The man looked tense, but then his body loosened and he had a expression on his face of acceptance. Asta seemed surprised. He would ask what that look was, and the man would actually get a grin. Asta would jump back in a second, barely dodging the spikes coming out of him. Asta quickly jumped out of the room, grabbing Happy and Lucy before managing to get free of the room. He had managed to get nicked a couple times, probably when he had to slow down to grab her. Lucy would just ask, what did that guy do? What's going on? Did he just kill himself? Asta just nod, saying he was planning on trying to take me down with him. He was surprised. He didn't expect a Dark Guild member to have this much conviction to be willing to commit suicide for his cause. But a second later, Lucy snapped out of her surprise and informed Asta what was going on outside. Asta grimacing. They would then meet up with the others. Happy would be thinking that there was something he forgot to tell Lucy, and still would remember about Virgo and would give it to her. But they wouldn't need it, since only a few seconds after Happy gave the key to Lucy, Asta just swung his sword as hard as he could, managing to break the wind barrier by running his sword against the flow of air. Asta would just smirk, saying that would have been a lot harder for me to do just a year ago. Erza would pat him on the shoulder, and the others would try to figure out. They would try to figure out a plan. Erza would gather them around and tell them to listen up. Asta and Happy will go first and try to head off Aragorn. Asta will be behind them to lend support, and the rest of them, which is Erza, Gray, Lucy, and Happy. Lucy would just look puzzled and say, how can Asta fly? As Erza just mentioned that he can actually surf on his large sword. Lucy would be surprised by this, as Asta would just mention that, yeah, I can do it, but it isn't very fast. Natsu and Happy are actually much faster in the air, as he jumped on, as the two rushed to try to head off Aragorn. As they left, a group of soldiers arrived looking for the Dark Guild members. Erza would just tell them how many were inside and that one of them escaped and that they're going to head him off, and that they believe they're going to heading to Clover. The leader of the soldiers would just nod and order his men to go seize the Dark Wizards. As the main group left, trailing behind Asta and Natsu, who was being carried by Happy. So, after that scene, we jump to Asta kicking Aragorn in the head, forcing him to land. Aragorn, angry after getting kicked in the face, he'll be looking around for who dare kick him in the head, and asked, who are you? Natsu, being carried by Happy, would just have a cheeky grin, introduce himself as Natsu Dragneel, proud member of the Fairytail Guild, which Aragorn would just scoff at, saying that he thought he caught all of them in the wind barrier. Asta would just say they dispelled it, and Aragorn would not believe him. Aragorn and Natsu would begin their fight, wind battling fire, and it would not look good for Natsu. Aragorn would quickly put up a wind barrier around himself after noticing that his wind attacks weren't doing too much damage. Every time Natsu attacked, the cyclone of air around Aragorn would simply snuff it out. Natsu would keep hitting and just keep getting angry. His flames would rise in size and intensity. Aragorn would be shocked by this, thinking, is that the flames of emotion? By the way, in canon, we have no idea what this is. This is a one-off statement. I might do something with it later in this what if, I'm not sure. But Happy, noticing Aragorn's getting worried and realizing what Natsu is doing is creating low and high pressure. Basically, without getting into the whole science stuff of it, is he is weakening Aragorn's wind magic. So Happy decides to make Natsu angrier by saying, "Don't worry, Natsu. Asta should be here any minute, and he should be able to take care of it." Which not would just be surprised Happy said that, since, why not have a little bit more faith in him? He doesn't want to rely on Asta for everything. And he would start to angrier. Happy would also say, "Yeah, and Gray's a lot cooler than you are." And Natsu's flames would just grow higher, eventually getting Aragorn's wind barrier to the point where it's barely visible. And Natsu channels all of his pent-up emotion into a Fire Dragon Sword Horn, slamming it into Aragorn. That would send him hurtling into the ground. Happy would just congratulate Natsu, saying, "You did it!" Natsu responding, "Wait, didn't you have very little faith in me just a few minutes ago?" Happy just says, "I don't know, cats have horrible memories." Natsu would just sigh and secure Aragorn. Asta, which had landed on a rock not too far away, was watching the latter half of the battle and just decided not to get involved. Then flew over and told Asta he did really good. Asta, puffing out his chest, would just say, "Yeah!" And the others would arrive 10 minutes later, with Asta holding Aragorn's arms to ensure he didn't escape. They would have also secured the Lullaby. Then, under the car, shadows shot out, trying to grab the Lullaby. It was Kage. He had managed to use the shadow underneath the magic mobile to travel. He began to try to drive off, but Asta quickly destroyed the front of the magic mobile with his sword to prevent him from going anywhere. After that, Gray punched out Kage, who had already been pretty beaten up by Natsu, and they managed to tie both of them up. Asta would hold on to the Lullaby for safekeeping, and they would be ready to go. Then would realize that their car was destroyed, and, Happy can only carry one person. And they would sigh, realizing that they would have to walk. Coming a week later to the Magic Council, they would be having an argument about what to do with Fairytail. They didn't like the fact that they would have to thank Fairytail for what they did. The Magic Council didn't like Fairytail, and the fact that they had managed to defeat this massive threat when the Magic Council didn't, many of the members thought it was a stain. Seagrain would just laugh and say that it wasn't their job to beat down guilds, their job was simply to try to keep the peace, with a few of the members agreeing while some disagreed. One of them would bring up the fact that shouldn't they be more concerned about a dark guild managing to get their hands on a relic this powerful, and them agreeing they should probably put an investigation on it. Some of the Magic Council want to put someone on trial for the damages, but they can't, since, Fairytail's considered heroes. Magic Council resigns, with Seagrain asking one of the other members if the plan's going forward on Galuna Island. Alright, I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, especially if you like this. This is the combination of my first 4 parts of What If Asta Was in Fairytale. More parts will be coming out soon. I'm going to start What If Midoriya Had Dimensional Magic, so I hope you enjoy that. I'm going to be busy on the channel, so unfortunately, the upload schedule is not going to be 100% set. But yeah, this is Spellray, signing off.